All right, so let's look at the rounding review from this week. So something that I know a lot of people said that they struggled with was not knowing what place value they were looking at. So the main three that you're going to want to look at are these three behind the decimal. Remember that your 10th is your first number behind the decimal, 100th is second, and 1000th is third. So this chart is in the slides that is posted in the week 1 module in Canvas. So you can print this out, write your numbers out in it to help you remember if that makes it easier. But just know that this chart, you won't be able to use that on the test next week. As far as this slide, looking at the rounding rules, just cross off these first 2 decimals. These first 2 bullet points. They're super confusing. I don't like how they're worded. What is important to remember from this, though, is that if you're doing something that's like drops, unscored pills, pumps, units, whatever, it needs to be a whole number. There can't be any decimals because you can't see 0.3 drops or 0.6 pumps. That's just not possible, so it needs to be a whole number. And we'll go over how to round those better once we get to those sort of problems. And then to reiterate from the intro, when you're calculating the weight, make sure you round to the nearest tenth. And remember that you need to only round prior to administration, not as you calculate, because if you round your problem as you're calculating it, then you're going to get a lot of confusing answers. Your final answer just is not going to be right. So I don't like this slide either. Just don't even look at that. It's confusing. So how do you round to the nearest tenth? So when you're rounding to the nearest tenth, which is that first number after the decimal, you want to look at your second number, which is your 100th spot. So for example, 0.82. You want to round to the nearest tenth, which is this first number. So you base how you round off of this second one. And the same general rules apply. If it's 4 or less, all you do is you just leave the number the same and remove what you don't need. So that would just become 0.8. But say the number was 0.89. Again, you want to round to your first number, so we're basing how we round on the second one. And because it's 5 or greater, you just add 1 to that number that's in your 10th spot, so it becomes 0.9. Hundredths is same sort of deal, except the number you're looking at, instead of looking at the number that's in the 100th spot or that second number after your decimal, you're looking at the third number after your decimal. So for example, it would be like 0.872. We want to round to this nearest number, so we're basing our rounding off of the 2. And because it's a 2, you would just drop it and leave everything else the same, meaning it would just be 0.87. But say it was 0.876. Again, you're looking at the number here. That's what you want to round to, so we're basing our rounding off of this third number. And because it's 6, you want to add 1 to your second number there after your decimals. Would be 0.88. And then again, kind of just reiterating whether you go up or down. 0 to 4, you round down, quote unquote, and you just keep the number the same and delete what you don't need. And then if it's 5 to 9, then you would round up by 1 and delete everything else. So let's look at rounding to the nearest whole number. When you're looking to round to the nearest whole number, which is this one here, this number before the decimal, you want to base your rounding on what's behind it. And same general rules apply. So 1.6. 6 is 5 or greater, so it becomes a 2. 0.6. 6 is 5 or greater, so it becomes a 1. 4.6. 6 is 5 or greater, so it becomes a 5. 7.8. 8 is 5 or greater, so it becomes an 8. Now 8.3. 3 is between 0 and 4, so you would just leave this number here the same and drop what you don't need, and it would still be an 8. Now over here, don't let this trip you up. You are still looking at this number here, which means you still need to base it on this first number after the decimal. So 2.72, that 7 that we're basing our rounding on is 5 or greater, so this would become a 3. Now the next one, 3.31, we're basing our rounding on this 3 here behind the decimal. It's between 0 and 4, so we leave our first number the same and drop everything else behind it. Kind of like a bad relationship. Just drop it and move on. Now, 5.61, we're looking at the 6. It's 5 or greater, so you round up to 6. 8.38, we're looking at the 3. It's between 0 and 4, so we just want to drop them and keep our 8. 9.81, we're basing our rounding off the 8. It's 5 or greater, so we add 1, and it becomes 10. So if you have any additional questions on this or something doesn't make sense, let me know and we can go over it some more and work some more problems. Now, rounding to the nearest tenth. Let's just work a few of these, not all of these. Let's see. Let's cut some of these off here. That way we have some room to work. So, look in here. We're rounding to the 10th. So remember, we're wanting to round to this number, which means we want to base our rounding on this second number. So 3.66. Our 6 is 5 or greater, so we want to add 1 to that 100th spot. 0.98. We're basing our rounding on the 8, which is between 5 and 9. So we want to add 1, meaning that this would become essentially just 1. Because the one higher than 9 is 10. So you would gain your number here, and this would change to a 0. 2.28. We're basing how we round on this 8 here. It's 5 or greater, so we want to add 1 and make it 2.3. Now don't let this next one trip you up. You're still wanting to look at this number to base your rounding on. So 0.724, that 2 is between 0 and 4, meaning we just want to drop everything else behind it like a bad relationship, and we just have 0.7. Now, 28.75, we're basing how we round on the 5. It's 5 or greater, so we want to add 1, which would make it 28.8. This next one, we're basing it on the 8. We want to add 1 because it's greater than 5, so 6.4. And then 1.904, basing it on the 0. It's between 0 and 4, meaning that we drop everything else, drop that relationship, and it just becomes 1.9. Now practice for the hundredths spot here. Let's cut some of these out so we have room to work and see it a little bit better. There we go. All right, so looking at the rounding to the nearest hundredths. Hundredths is our second number behind the decimal. So the one here. We're wanting to round based on this third number here, which is a 5. So same thing as before. 5 is 5 or greater, so we want to add 1 to that 1, making it 0 or 6.42. Same thing for the next one. We want to round to that second number after the decimal. We're going to base it on our third number there. It's 5 or greater, so we want to add 1, and we're 0.34. Same here, looking at our 7 is where we want to round to, but we're basing it off this 5. It's 5 or greater, so we want to add 1 to where we're looking at there to be 6.38. Looking at the second number, basing it off the 6. 5 or greater, so we want to add 1 and it becomes 6.79. So we want this next one, we want to look at our 6 here, but we're basing it off of our 5. 5 or greater, we want to go up, so we're at 7.07. This next one, we're looking at our 2, but we're basing it off the 0. Now, remember, 0 to 4, you just drop the relationship and just have 0.92. So going over problems from our worksheet today, since it was probably a little hard for everyone to see it on the board, we are rounding to the nearest 7th, which is our first number after the decimal. The number we're basing it off of is the 8, which means we would take our 10th number, that first number, up by 1 to 101.8. This next one, you're looking at the 8 is what you're going to base your rounding off of. It is higher, 5 or higher, so you add 1. Same thing for the next one. We're basing it off of the 6, so we want to add 1. And the best way to remember it, if you're kind of confused on what you're adding 1 to, you're adding 1 to your tenths. So you're going to plus 1, the first number, after the decimal. So just remember that. When you're rounding to the 10th, you just want to plus 1 to the first number after the decimal if 5 or higher. So here we're looking at our 1, but we just drop that 1 because he's no good for us. We're basing this off the 2. We're just at 0.7 because this 2, 4, we don't need them anymore. Same thing here. We're basing it off the 1. Drop the 1 and 4 because we don't need them. And we are left with 8.9. Basing this next one off the 7. It's 5 or greater. So remember, we want to add 1 to this first number after our decimal, which is 14.7. And on this last one, we're looking at the 8. It's 5 or greater. So we want to add 1 to that first number after the decimal. So then you're left with 51.1. Now we're rounding to the nearest hundredths. So on this one, think of it as plus 1 to the second number after the decimal if 5 or higher. So we're basing our number off of this third one. How we're rounding, we're basing off that third number behind the decimal. It's 4 or less, so we just drop the 4, and we're at 10.33. Next one we're basing on 1, drop it, 9.45. Basing it on the 1, drop it, 0.8. Or you could do 0.80. Looking at basing this next one off the 4, we're dropping them, 15.13. Basing it on the 8 here, so it's 8 is 5 or higher, so we want to add 1 to that second number after the decimal, making it 45.22. Basing it off the 9, we want to add 1 to that second number after the decimal, which make it 99.11. Same thing with the next one. 6 is 5 or higher, so we want to add 1 to that second number after the decimal, making it 25.38. And last one, we're basing out how we round on this too. Drop them, we don't need them, and it becomes 12.1 or 12.10. And then last practice from the sheet from earlier today that we did in class. Remember, we're wanting to round the whole number, which is your number before the decimal. So we're basing our rounding on the number behind the decimal. So 13.7, 7's higher than 5, so we want to plus 1 our first number, and it would become 14. Again, for this next one, don't let the 3 numbers trip you up. We're still just looking at our first number that's hanging out there behind the decimal. It's 5 or higher, so we round up to 3. Same thing here. Number behind the decimal is greater than 5, so we want to round up to 33. Same issue here. Different issue here, actually, because you're looking at your 4. You just, again, 4 or less, just drop it. We don't need it, and it becomes 7. Same here. Looking at the 2, 4 or less, drop it. We don't need it. We're looking at the 8 here in this one. It's 5 or higher, so we want to make that a 1 because we're adding 1 to this number, the number in front of the decimal. So then you're looking at this last one. We're basing it off our 1. It's less than 4. Drop it. We don't need it, and we're just left with 4. So if y'all have any questions on any of the rounding, just let me know. We can go over it some more. There is a rounding practice sheet that I posted in Canvas for y'all a little bit earlier, so you can get plenty of practice with that if you go over there and just work on that problem.